In the million worlds of the Imperium of man, faith is a force of nature. It is gravity, it is atmosphere, it is the unbreakable firmament upon which the survival of the human race is built. In the heart of a hive city, in a colossal cathedral carved from a mountain of rockcrete and faith, 1,000,000 souls chant the same prayers, their voices rising as one to the vaulted star-high ceiling. They pray before icons of gold and marble, but their truest veneration, their most desperate hope, is reserved for the images of the living saints. Rendered in stained glass, in masterful frescoes, and in towering statues, the saints are the ultimate proof of the divine. They are hope-made, manifest the living, breathing instruments of the God Emperor's will, a testament to the idea that even in this dark and terrible galaxy, humanity can produce beings of pure, unassailable holiness. Hidden in a shadowed alcove far from the adoring masses, Inquisitor Rostov watches his observations recorded by a hidden servo skull. He is not here to worship. He is here to study, to dissect the very nature of this phenomenon. They call them miracles, he dictates in a low whisper, his voice a dry counterpoint to the soaring hymns. And they are. Beings of immense power capable of turning the tide of wars, of healing the sick, of banishing the demonic with a gesture. But the warp is a sea of bargains, and power is never ever a gift. It is a transaction. So I ask the question the ecclesiarchy dares not when a soul is so profoundly blessed by the God Emperor, what is received and what is exchanged. When a mortal woman is granted the immortality and power of a saint, is her soul the price of the purchase? Rostov's gaze drifts to a fresco of Saint Celestine, her face serene, her eyes radiating a divine light. The slave to chaos is an honest creature, he muses. Its damnation is written on its flesh in mutations and screaming runes. It is a prisoner in a cage of iron and agony, and it knows it. But the servant of the Emperor, the one who ascends to the highest peak of devotion, what of them? Their cage is not of iron, but of gilded light. Their chains are not of hate, but of adoration from 1,000,000,000,000 souls. And their servitude is not to a shrieking demon, but to the silent, calculating will of a dying god. In the brutal calculus of the Imperium, the ultimate sacrifice is not the giving of one's life. That is a soldier's simple duty. The ultimate sacrifice is the giving of one's self, the complete and utter annihilation of the soul to make way for the divine. It is the story of a perfect vessel made beautiful and holy and utterly, eternally empty. The life of Sister Anya of the Order of the Sacred Rose was one of quiet, unassuming devotion. Within the hallowed cloisters of her order's convent on the shrine world of Lucia, she was not the most skilled warrior nor the most fervent preacher. Her bolter drills were adequate. Her knowledge of the imperial creed was proficient, but she lacked the fiery zeal that marked many of her sisters for greatness. Her defining quality, the one that endeared her to those around her, was a simple, profound kindness. Her hands were quicker to tend a wound than to fire a bolter, her voice more often heard in a soft word of encouragement than a zealous battle cry. Her closest friend, Sister Helena, a fiery and ambitious warrior, would often joke that Anya's heart was a greater shield than any power armor. Their bond was a small, warm pocket of humanity in a life dedicated to grim, superhuman duty. In the quiet moments after morning prayers, when the grand cathedral was still and filled with the scent of sacred incense, Anya would allow herself a moment of private reflection. She would take from a hidden pouch a small personal icon that was not of imperial make. It was a fossilized rose, its delicate petals perfectly preserved in the dark volcanic rock of her homeworld Lyra Nova. Holding it, she would let the memories come, not of great battles or moments of faith, but of small human things. The smell of her mother's baking, the rough feel of her father's hand, the sight of the rose field stretching out under a sky of a softer blue than this one. These were forbidden attachments, weaknesses to be purged in the fires of devotion, but they were a part of her she could not and would not let go of. They were the proof that before she was Sister Anya of the Adepta Sororitas, she was Anya, a girl from a world of rock and roses. And it was this humanity, this fragile connection to a life of simple peace, that would make her ultimate sacrifice so absolute. Hell came to Lucia. It did not come with the brutish roar of an orc wah or the silent, soulless advance of the Necrons. It came with a scream of ecstatic agony, a wave of perfumed corruption that twisted the very air. The forces of Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Chaos, had descended upon the shrine world, a tide of graceful, blade-limbed demonettes and monstrous hedonistic champions. The war was a thing of nightmares, a battle fought not just for territory, but for the very soul of the planet. The demons did not just kill. They tempted, they corrupted their whispers, promising an end to duty, an eternity of sensation. The Order of the Sacred Rose stood against this tide, a thin line of black and white armor against a rainbow of depravity. The fighting was horrific. Sisters of battle warriors who had faced the galaxy's greatest horrors were driven mad by the sensory onslaught, their faith faltering under the promise of forbidden pleasures. Anya fought with a desperate courage. She never knew she possessed her bolter, spitting death at the graceful dancing forms of the demonettes. She was not fighting for the planet or even for the Emperor. She was fighting for the sister at her side. Sister Helena, always the fiercer warrior, had been at the forefront of the counterattack and had paid the price. A great gash inflicted by the scented claw of a fiend of Slaanesh had torn through her side. She lay in the ruins of a desecrated chapel, her breath shallow, her lifeblood staining the shattered marble floor. Anya knelt beside her, holding her hand, firing her bolter, one-handed at the demons pouring through the shattered archway. "I am here." Helena Anya whispered, her voice a fierce promise over the cacophony of battle. "I will not leave you. We will hold this ground." Helena smiled weakly, her faith in her friend as absolute as her faith in the Emperor. Their position was hopeless. The last of their squad had fallen, and the demonic host was closing in. Through the smoke and the shimmering, corrupting haze, Anya saw it, a demon prince of Slaanesh, a being of terrifying androgynous beauty, its whip-like claws still dripping with the blood of her sisters. It glided towards them, its eyes fixed on the wounded Helena, a cruel, beautiful smile on its face. It was the end. There was no hope of victory, no chance of rescue, but there was still a choice. Anya looked at her dying friend, at the handful of other wounded survivors huddled in the ruins, and she looked at the approaching demigod. Her heart, the kind heart of the girl from Lyra Nova, made its final decision. It would not be a choice of victory, but of sacrifice. With the calm resolve of the truly faithful, Anya met the gaze of the advancing demon prince. There was no fear left in her, only a profound, protective love for the sister she was about to die for. She gave Helena's hand one last gentle squeeze, a silent goodbye. Then she stood and walked forward to meet the demigod, her bolter hanging uselessly at her side. The demon prince paused, its beautiful face alight with cruel curiosity at this strange final act of defiance. It did not see the subtle movement of Anya's hand as she reached behind her back, her fingers finding the emergency release valve of her armor's plasma core power pack. For the Emperor, she whispered, her voice not a shout but a quiet personal prayer. "And for you, Helena." She twisted the valve deliberately and forcefully, overriding every safety protocol. The effect was instantaneous. A high-pitched whine emanated from her backpack, and a blinding white-hot light began to envelop her, turning her silhouette into that of a miniature star. The demon prince's curious smile turned into a mask of sudden, dawning horror. It had no time to flee, no time to even scream. Anya's self-immolation culminated in a silent, all-consuming detonation of pure plasma energy. A wave of purifying fire vaporized the demon prince, the surrounding demons, and Sister Anya herself, leaving behind nothing but a smoking, glass-lined crater and a profound, ringing silence. From the ashes of this ultimate sacrifice, a new light was born. It began as a single, impossibly bright point of gold in the center of the crater. It did not burn. It radiated a holy warmth that pushed back the cloying corruption of the air. The light expanded, and within its heart a new form was woven from motes of dust and pure energy. Limbs of pale, perfect flesh coalesced from the ash. Armor of gleaming, unblemished silver and white formed around her. Sister Anya was remade. She rose from the epicenter of her own death, not as a survivor, but as a resurrection. Her body was whole, unscarred, and radiating a palpable aura of divine power. She opened her eyes, and they were no longer the gentle, compassionate brown of a girl from a distant world. They were pools of molten golden light, ancient and terrible in their intensity. As she rose to her full height, two immense shimmering wings of pure golden light unfurled from her back, casting a glorious, holy radiance over the battlefield. The miracle was complete. Anya, the sister of battle, was dead. In her place stood a saint. The power that now coursed through the reborn Anya felt as natural as breathing. It was an ocean of divine energy, and she was its master. With a grace that was no longer human, she turned to the remaining demons who were now recoiling in terror from the holy light she emanated. She raised a hand, and a beam of pure golden energy lanced out, turning a cowering demonette to shimmering dust. She moved amongst them, no longer a soldier fighting a desperate battle, but a divine judgment, a cleansing fire that effortlessly, almost casually purged the battlefield of the last vestiges of the Slaaneshi corruption. There was no struggle, no exertion. There was only the calm, absolute application of an infinite power. When the last daemon had been unmade, a profound silence fell over the ruins. Anya's wings of light folded back, and she turned to the survivors. Sister Helena, her face a mask of awe, disbelief, and a dawning reverent fear, had struggled to her knees. The other surviving sisters of battle, their faces streaked with blood and tears, did the same. They all knelt. They were no longer looking at their friend, their comrade in arms. They were looking at a living miracle, a physical manifestation of the Emperor's grace. Helena looked up, her lips forming her friend's name, but no sound came out. How could she speak to such a being as an equal? Anya smiled at them, a gentle, beatific smile that seemed to radiate warmth and forgiveness. It was the smile of a saint, of a holy icon from a stained glass window. But as she looked at the kneeling form of her dearest friend, the woman for whom she had just died, the smile felt distant. It was a gesture her body made, a response it knew was appropriate. But behind the serene golden eyes, the girl who had held Helena's hand felt the first faint chilling sense of separation. She was here before her friends, triumphant and powerful, but she was also watching them from a great and ever-growing distance. In the aftermath of the battle, once the wounded were tended to, and the initial shock had given way to a hushed, trembling reverence, Anya sought a moment of solitude. She returned to the ruins of the desecrated chapel, the place where she had made her final stand, and knelt before the shattered altar. She needed to pray. She needed to connect with the source of this incredible power, to offer thanks to the God Emperor who had seen fit to spare her, to remake her. She closed her golden eyes, bowed her head, and began the familiar words of the litany of praise, seeking the quiet, contemplative peace that had always been the heart of her faith. But the familiar silence did not come. The quiet chamber of her soul, once her own, was now an open conduit. A flood of information, cold and impersonal, poured into her mind. It was not a voice, not a vision, but a torrent of pure, raw data. She saw star charts of systems she had never heard of, their orbital paths calculated to 1,000,000 decimal places. She saw the real-time logistical status of 1,000 Imperial Guard regiments, their ammunition counts, fuel levels, and casualty rates scrolling past her mind's eye. She saw probability matrices, complex shifting equations that calculated the statistical likelihood of victory or defeat in 100 different war zones simultaneously. The warmth of her personal faith was drowned in an Arctic ocean of cold strategic calculus. This was not the comforting presence of a benevolent father. It was the vast, unfeeling consciousness of a galactic supercomputer. She recoiled from the sheer scale of it, trying to pull her mind back to find the small, quiet space that had once been hers. But the flow of data was relentless. And then it coalesced. From the endless stream of information, a single, undeniable truth emerged, planting itself in her mind not as an order, but as a self-evident fact, a strategic imperative as fundamental as the laws of physics. It was not a whisper. It was a line of pure, undeniable logic. Viridian system. Orc menace detected. Probability of system collapse. 78.4%. Imperial assets insufficient. Intervention required. Anya opened her eyes, the golden light within them flickering with a dawning, terrifying understanding. She had prayed for communion. She had been given a target analysis. Her first divine mission had arrived not in a blaze of glory, but like a tactical directive downloaded directly into her soul. The journey to the Viridian system was a strange, dislocating experience. Anya traveled aboard a battleship of the Imperial Navy, revered as a holy icon by the crew who would avert their eyes and make the sign of the Aquila whenever she passed. They had given her the grandest stateroom, a chamber adorned with relics and sacred tapestries. It was here, in the quiet solitude of the long void transit, that she first realized parts of her were beginning to disappear. She tried to cling to the memory of the girl she had been. She sat holding the space where her fossilized rose used to be and tried to remember her home. She tried to conjure the memory of her mother's smile, the exact taste of the warm, freshly baked bread she would make on festival days. The image was there, but it was like a faded pict capture, a flat, two-dimensional image devoid of warmth or emotion. She knew intellectually that the memory was one of happiness, but she could not feel the happiness. The sensory details were gone, erased, and as she tried to grasp the fading memory of the bread's taste, her mind unbidden supplied a different set of information with perfect clinical clarity. Standard Imperial Guard ration bar 7 gamma contains 68% processed agri-carbohydrate, 12% protein slurry, 11% nutrient filler, 9% vitamin mineral supplements. Chemical composition available upon request. The small personal details that had made up her life were being systematically overwritten by a new, relentlessly practical database. The change was insidious. One day, during a briefing with the ship's captain, she found a small pouch of her belongings that a sister had recovered from the battlefield. Inside was her personal prayer book, a few devotional icons, and the shattered pieces of her fossilized rose. It had broken when she fell. She picked up the fragments of dark stone, the pieces of the one physical link to her childhood, the keepsake she had treasured for her entire adult life. She looked at the broken shards in her palm, and she felt nothing. No sadness, no sense of loss, no nostalgia. There was only a quiet, logical assessment object. Petrological composition sedimentary silicate. Origin Lyra Nova, status broken. Tactical value none. A single clear tear, the last remnant of a forgotten sorrow, rolled down her cheek and fell upon the dead stone. Upon their arrival in the Viridian system, Sister Helena, now elevated to the rank of canoness, in recognition of her bravery and her proximity to the miracle, was granted a private audience. She entered Anya's grand stateroom, hoping to find a glimmer of the friend she had lost. She found a goddess. Anya stood by the great armored viewport, bathed in starlight, her presence filling the room with a palpable holy aura. Anya Helena began, her voice hesitant. "It is good to see you, alone." The saint turned, her golden eyes serene, her smile gentle and distant. "The Emperor is never alone, Canoness. He is with all who serve in faith." Helena flinched at the formal title. "Please, Anya, it's me, Helena. I wanted to know how you are. Truly." She took a step forward, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Are you in there?" The question was met with a placid, uncomprehending stare. "To serve is the highest state of being," the saint replied, her voice a calm, melodic recitation. As the blessed Thor wrote, "The body is a vessel, the soul is a flame, and both burn brightest in the Emperor's name." There was an invisible, impenetrable wall of light between them. The warmth of their old friendship could not pass through it. Helena saw with heartbreaking clarity that she was not speaking to her friend. She was speaking to a holy text, a beautiful living icon that could only respond with doctrine and divine purpose. Defeated, her eyes filled with tears, she simply bowed her head and backed away, leaving the saint alone in her gilded chamber. As the door closed, a flicker of something ancient and human stirred within Anya. A phantom echo of a thought: "Helena is sad. Comfort her." But the thought was immediately intercepted, analyzed, and repurposed by the divine will that now governed her mind. Analysis. The emotional distress of Canoness. Helena is a potential tactical liability. Her faith must be reinforced. She realized with a chilling, detached clarity that she was no longer capable of a simple human conversation. Every thought, every impulse was now filtered through the cold, relentless logic of her holy purpose. She was a conduit for a god, and a god does not have friends. The orc threat in the Viridian system was not just a military invasion, it was a plague of the soul. On the agri-world of Viridia Prime, a strange and virulent fever born from the greenskins' alien spores was sweeping through the population. The sick were quarantined in vast makeshift Medicae cathedrals, their bodies racked with pain, their souls filled with despair. The arrival of Saint Anya was heralded as a sign of their deliverance. She walked through the overflowing wards, a figure of pure golden light in a world of sickness and misery. The divine power flowed from her effortlessly. She laid her hands upon the feverish brows of the dying, and the sickness fled from their bodies. She spoke words of healing, and crippled limbs were made whole. Thousands were saved by her touch, their cries of agony turning into sobs of joyous, reverent worship. They threw themselves at her feet, kissing the hem of her robes, praising the Emperor for the miracle he had sent them. Anya moved among them, her face a mask of serene compassion, her hands performing the works of a god. But behind the golden eyes, she felt nothing. There was no pity for their suffering, no joy in their salvation. There was only the cold, efficient execution of a task. The act of healing was a biological process, a purging of Xenos contaminants to restore the functionality of Imperial assets. Her work of healing was complete, but the source of the plague, the heavily infested capital city of Viridia Secundus, remained a festering wound on the planet. To send in the guard would take weeks and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. As she stood on the command deck of the orbiting battleship, the cold, logical imperative formed in her mind, a tactical directive from the throne itself. Source of contagion must be sterilized. Probability of reinfection, 92.7%. Acceptable losses for conventional ground assault too high. Solution, orbital purification. She turned to the ship's admiral, her face calm, her voice a melody of divine authority. You are to commence exterminatus proceedings on the primary hive city. Scour it from the face of the planet. The admiral stared at her horrified. My lady, the city, there are millions inside. We have just saved thousands. Anya's golden eyes were devoid of any emotion. The Emperor's will is not a thing to be questioned. You have your orders. She turned back to the viewport, watching as the lances of fiery death rained down from the heavens, turning the city and the hundreds of thousands of souls within it, including many she had personally healed just hours before, into a sea of glass and fire. She felt no remorse, no sadness, no conflict. There was only the quiet, cold satisfaction of a problem that had been efficiently and permanently solved. The Vindicated, now hailed as the saviors of Viridia Prime, were rearmed and resupplied, their past heresies conveniently forgotten in the face of the Saints' undeniable power. As Anya walked through the halls of the governor's palace, mortals fell to their knees, their faces filled with rapturous awe. A young guardsman, his arm still in a sling from a wound she had healed, fell before her, his eyes streaming with tears of gratitude. My lady, he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. What is it like to be chosen by him, to feel his divine will flow through you? Anya's body stopped. It turned to the young man, and a smile of pure beatific serenity graced her lips. The smile was a perfect work of art, radiating warmth, compassion, and a profound holy peace. There are no mortal words, my child, to describe the bliss of fulfilling one's true purpose. Her voice replied, a gentle melodic sound that soothed the soul. It is a joy found only in the complete and total surrender to his divine light. It is a peace that passes all understanding. But inside, in the vast, cold emptiness of her mind, a silent psychic scream echoed without end. As her mouth spoke the beautiful, comforting words, the last flickering ember of the real Anya watched in horror. She was a spectator to her own actions, a prisoner behind the eyes of a goddess. She felt her lips move, felt the muscles in her face contract to form the perfect, holy smile, but she was not the one giving the commands. She realized with a sudden, soul-crushing certainty that she was living in a play. She was the star of the show, the object of all adoration, but she was not the actor. She was merely the puppet, her strings pulled by a silent, divine, and utterly merciless master. The mask of serenity was now her permanent face, but the silent scream within her continued. The last remnant of her soul, the tiny, trapped spark of Anya, began to fight back in the only way it could. It tried to think. It tried to assert its own will, to form a single thought that was not part of the grand divine calculus. She was standing on the bridge of a battleship, her gaze fixed on the star charts, when the spark of her old self tried to form a simple human thought: I want to rest. It was a thought born of a deep, soul-crushing weariness, a desire for just one moment of peace from the constant stream of data from the burden of divinity. But the thought was not allowed to exist in its pure form. The moment it began to form, the divine will that now permeated her mind seized it, intercepted it, and instantly translated it into its own cold, logical language. The desire, I want to rest, was twisted and reformed into a new, approved thought. Tactical analysis. A designated period of meditative stasis will optimize combat effectiveness for the next operational cycle. The physical vessel requires regeneration. The human desire for peace was warped into a strategic assessment of asset preservation. She tried again, a flicker of rebellion. A memory of Helena's laugh surfaced, and with it the thought, "I miss my friend." Immediately it was corrupted. Analysis Canoness. Helena is a valuable command asset. Maintaining her morale is strategically important for the cohesion of the Order of the Sacred Rose. A formal blessing is the most efficient method to ensure her continued operational peak. Anya's soul was trapped in an echo chamber. Every independent thought she attempted to generate was instantly absorbed and reflected back at her in the cold, alien language of her new master. She could no longer distinguish where her own thoughts ended and the Emperor's will began. They were one and the same now. The scream inside her began to fade, not because the horror was ending, but because she was forgetting how to form the thoughts to sustain it. And so she became a legend. Her story spread across the segmentum, a holy fire of hope in a galaxy of darkness. The tale of her miracle on Lucia, of her salvation of the Viridian system, became a cornerstone of the Imperial creed in a dozen sectors. Where the tide of battle turned against the Imperium, the saint was dispatched, a living holy weapon to ensure victory where all other strategies had failed. A montage of her holy works was written in the blood of heretics and the light of miracles. On the burning deserts of Armageddon, she was a golden angel leading the charge of Steel Legion tanks, her holy light turning back a tide of orc gargants. In the swirling mists of the veiled region, she moved like a phantom through Eldar lines, her prescient tactical knowledge allowing her to outmaneuver the Farseers themselves, her wrath a sudden shocking storm of violence that shattered their elegant battle plans. Against the demonic legions of the ruinous powers, she was the ultimate anathema, a living beacon of the Emperor's authority, whose very presence caused the creatures of the warp to recoil in agony. She was victory incarnate. Planets were saved in her name. Crusades were launched with her at their head. Her legend grew until it became an unassailable truth, a foundational pillar of faith for a billion souls. But the name of the girl who had died in a plasma blast on Lucia was slowly being forgotten even by those who had known her. The soldiers and citizens no longer spoke of Anya. The ecclesiarchy scribes in their holy texts no longer recorded the deeds of Anya. Even Sister Helena in her formal reports now referred to her only by her official designations. She was the Viridian Saint. She was the Emperor's wrath. She was the Light of Terra. The personal, intimate name of Anya, the name a mother had once called out across a field of roses, had been deemed too small, too mortal to contain the divine. It was erased, buried under the weight of her own legend. The vessel was now fully prepared, and its original name had been scrubbed from the hull. Decades passed. The living saint became a permanent fixture in the tapestry of the Imperium's eternal war, a golden thread of victory and hope. The last embers of Anya's soul were now a near-silent prisoner, a pinprick of consciousness in a vast divine machine. But the past is never truly dead in the 41st millennium. A new directive formed in her mind, cold and clear as always: Lyra Nova. Secessionist uprising. Compliance must be restored. Her homeworld. The name itself was a ghost, a word that held no emotional resonance for the saint. But for the tiny, trapped spark within it was a tremor, a crack in the silent prison. She was dispatched to the world of her birth, the planet of volcanic rock and fossilized roses. The uprising was not a chaos-tainted rebellion, but a desperate movement of a populace tired of impossible tithes and endless war. They were simple miners and farmers, good imperial citizens who had been pushed too far. The saint descended upon the capital city, her presence intended to quell the rebellion without a fight, a show of overwhelming divine power to cow the populace back into submission. She strode into the main square, a figure of impossible, terrifying glory, her wings of light casting a golden glow on the grim, determined faces of the rebellion's leaders. She was about to pronounce the Emperor's judgment upon them when their leader, a weary, gray-haired man with the tired eyes of a miner, stepped forward. He was not armed. He did not look at her with fear or hatred. He looked at her with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. He stopped before her, the crowd falling silent. He looked past the golden eyes, past the wings of light, and seemed to see something no one else had seen in 50 years. "Anya," he whispered, his voice cracking with age and disbelief. "Little Anya Var. Is that you?" He was an old friend of her father's, a man who had held her as a child. He did not see a saint. He saw the girl he used to know. He did not raise a weapon. He simply reached out a calloused, trembling hand. "By the throne, what have they done to you, child?" The name, Anya. It was a key turning a lock that had been rusted shut for decades. The old man's words, spoken not with fear but with a heartbreaking familiarity, bypassed the divine machine that now governed her. For the first time in nearly a century, the cold, logical flow of strategic data in her mind was interrupted by a surge of pure, chaotic human memory. The fossilized rose, Helena's laugh, the smell of her mother's kitchen. 1,000 forgotten moments flooded the tiny imprisoned spark of her original soul, and that spark, which had been a near-silent observer for so long, awoke with a shriek of abject horror. The ghost of Anya Var looked out through the golden eyes of the saint and truly saw herself for the first time. She saw the monstrous beatific puppet she had become. She saw the wall of reverent fear that separated her from all humanity. She saw the memory of the city she had condemned to the fire with a placid smile, and the fragment of that long-dead girl rebelled. It was a pathetic, desperate insurrection, a single screaming human thought pushing back against an ocean of divine, unfeeling will. This is wrong. This is not me. This is... The internal conflict manifested as a visible flaw in the miracle. For a single stunning moment, the saint's vast wings of golden light flickered and dimmed, their holy light wavering like a dying candle. The serene, beatific mask on her face fell away, replaced by a flicker of profound confusion, of a deep and ancient pain. Her hand, which had been rising to point an accusing, damning finger at the old man, stopped in midair. For the first time since her death on Lucia, the divine instrument hesitated. For one glorious, rebellious second, Anya was in control. The hesitation was an error, a flaw in the system. The divine calculating will that possessed Anya's form perceived this surge of human emotion not as a memory but as a corruption, a software glitch that needed to be purged. The Emperor's will, cold, impersonal, and utterly without mercy, turned its full, terrifying focus inward to repair its chosen instrument. A storm of golden fire erupted in the vast, quiet space of Anya's mind. The divine will did not gently soothe or suppress the re-emergent memories. It attacked them with the ruthless efficiency of an exterminatus fleet. The process was a brutal, systematic purification of the soul. We, the observers, experience it as a final, tragic holocaust of the self. The memory of Sister Helena's laughter, once a source of warmth, was analyzed as a non-essential emotional attachment, and the memory file was violently corrupted, its sound turning into screeching static before being deleted. The image of her childhood home was flagged as irrelevant geographical data, and the warm colors of her memory were bled out, leaving a gray, lifeless schematic that then dissolved into dust. The treasured tactile memory of the fossilized rose was identified as a point of illogical sentimentality. The feeling of the stone in her hand, the memory of its delicate shape, was burned away, leaving nothing but its cold geological classification. One by one, every memory, every feeling, every connection that made Anya human was hunted down and annihilated by the divine machine she was bound to. The tiny, rebellious spark of her soul did not stand a chance. It was utterly, completely, and permanently scoured from existence. The flicker of rebellion, the last gasp of a dying soul, lasted only for a second. On the face of the living saint, the brief expression of human pain was wiped clean, replaced by a serenity so absolute, so profound, it was no longer beautiful but terrifyingly blank. The golden wings behind her, which had faltered for a moment, now blazed with a renewed and terrible intensity. The hesitation was gone. The error had been corrected. Her golden eyes, now as cold and empty as polished metal, settled on the old man. His face, which had held a flicker of desperate hope, now fell as he saw the truth. The girl he knew was gone. The saint's hand, no longer frozen, completed its gesture, her finger pointing at him not as a weapon, but as a final, undeniable verdict. Her voice, when it spoke, was no longer melodic, but was as clear, sharp, and cold as breaking glass. To invoke the name of the vessel is to deny the divinity of its contents. The saint declared, her words echoing across the silent plaza with the weight of absolute law. To cling to the past is to reject the Emperor's glorious future. This is heresy of the soul. She did not strike him down herself. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the canoness of the Sacred Rose, a woman who had once been her friend Helena. A single bolter shot rang out, and the old man who had remembered Anya fell to the ground, his quest to find the girl he once knew finally over. With the source of the corruption eliminated, the saint proceeded to crush the uprising with a calm, chilling, and perfect efficiency. There were no more miracles of healing, only pronouncements of judgment. There was no more hesitation, only the flawless execution of the Emperor's will. She was beautiful. She was holy. And she was now a perfect and perfectly empty instrument. And so the legend of the Saint of Viridia, the Emperor's Wrath, was cemented in glory for all time. She became one of the most revered figures in the history of the Segmentum, a symbol of hope and divine intervention, second only to Celestine herself. On 1,000 worlds, the faithful erected towering statues in her image, their faces serene, their wings of light rendered in gold leaf and brilliant glass. 1,000,000 choirs sang hymns of her holy deeds of the day she was reborn in fire to save the righteous of the worlds she purged with holy light. She was the ultimate proof of the Emperor's love, a promise that even in the darkest of times the most faithful of his servants could be raised up to share in his divine power. She was a beacon of hope in a galaxy drowning in despair. The final scene of this story takes us past the statues, past the hymns, past the gilded armor and the wings of light. We journey into the one place no one in the galaxy could ever reach, the interior of the saint's own mind. It is not a place of divine communion or transcendent thought. It is a vast, white, and silent void, an empty room at the heart of infinity. It is a prison of perfect, unending peace. At the very center of this silent, empty space, there is a single, tiny, flickering point of light. It is a mote of dust in an endless cathedral, a single forgotten star in a dead galaxy. This point of light is all that is left of Anyavar. It has no voice to scream, it has no hands to fight, it has no will of its own. It is a consciousness stripped of all agency, a prisoner in the solitary confinement of its own sanctified flesh. All it can do is watch. It is an eternal observer looking out through the golden eyes of a goddess it does not control. It watches as its hands heal the sick and feels nothing. It watches as its mouth pronounces judgment upon the innocent and feels nothing. It witnesses its own body perform great miracles and commit terrible atrocities, a passenger in a holy vessel sailing on an endless sea of service. She had been granted the ultimate reward for her faith and sacrifice, eternal life in service to the Emperor of mankind. And that service is a sentence, a damnation more complete than any offered by the dark gods. The heretic is enslaved in a cage of iron and rage, but at least they are allowed to scream. In the blinding, beatific, and all-consuming light of the Emperor's divinity, Anya's soul had not been corrupted. It had been extinguished, replaced by a terrible, silent, and holy void. This is the price of salvation. This is the curse of being a saint. Her golden eyes, now as cold and empty as polished metal, settled on the old man. His face, which had held a flicker of desperate hope, now fell as he saw the truth. The girl he knew was gone. The saint's hand, no longer frozen, completed its gesture, her finger pointing at him not as a weapon, but as a final, undeniable verdict. Her voice, when it spoke, was no longer melodic, but was as clear, sharp, and cold as breaking glass. To invoke the name of the vessel is to deny the divinity of its contents. The saint declared her words echoing across the silent plaza with the weight of absolute law. To cling to the past is to reject the Emperor's glorious future. This is heresy of the soul. She did not strike him down herself. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the canoness of the Sacred Rose, a woman who had once been her friend Helena. A single bolter shot rang out, and the old man who had remembered Anya fell to the ground, his quest to find the girl he once knew finally over. With the source of the corruption eliminated, the saint proceeded to crush the uprising with a calm, chilling, and perfect efficiency. There were no more miracles of healing, only pronouncements of judgment. There was no more hesitation, only the flawless execution of the Emperor's will. She was beautiful, she was holy, and she was now a perfect and perfectly empty instrument. And so the legend of the Saint of Viridia, the Emperor's Wrath, was cemented in glory for all time. She became one of the most revered figures in the history of the Segmentum, a symbol of hope and divine intervention, second only to Celestine herself. On 1,000 worlds, the faithful erected towering statues in her image, their faces serene, their wings of light rendered in gold leaf and brilliant glass. 1,000,000 choirs sang hymns of her holy deeds of the day she was reborn in fire to save the righteous of the worlds she purged with holy light. She was the ultimate proof of the Emperor's love, a promise that even in the darkest of times, the most faithful of his servants could be raised up to share in his divine power. She was a beacon of hope in a galaxy drowning in despair. The final scene of this story takes us past the statues, past the hymns, past the gilded armor and the wings of light. We journey into the one place no one in the galaxy could ever reach, the interior of the saint's own mind. It is not a place of divine communion or transcendent thought. It is a vast, white and silent void, an empty room at the heart of infinity. It is a prison of perfect, unending peace. At the very center of this silent, empty space, there is a single tiny flickering point of light. It is a mote of dust in an endless cathedral, a single forgotten star in a dead galaxy. This point of light is all that is left of Anyavar. It has no voice to scream. It has no hands to fight. It has no will of its own. It is a consciousness stripped of all agency, a prisoner in the solitary confinement of its own sanctified flesh. All it can do is watch. It is an eternal observer looking out through the golden eyes of a goddess it does not control. It watches as its hands heal the sick and feels nothing. It watches as its mouth pronounces judgment upon the innocent and feels nothing. It witnesses its own body perform great miracles and commit terrible atrocities, a passenger in a holy vessel sailing on an endless sea of service. She had been granted the ultimate reward for her faith and sacrifice, eternal life in service to the Emperor of mankind. And that service is a sentence, a damnation more complete than any offered by the dark gods. The heretic is enslaved in a cage of iron and rage, but at least they are allowed to scream. In the blinding, beatific, and all-consuming light of the Emperor's divinity, Anya's soul had not been corrupted. It had been extinguished, replaced by a terrible, silent, and holy void. This is the price of salvation. This is the curse of being a saint.